Hey guys, I'm Darren Miles with Darren Miles Photography, and I'm based here in beautiful, sunny Southwest Florida. And this is value with a capital T. Now, if you shoot Sony and you're in the market for an 85mm lens, you might want to watch this video before you make that decision. Let's check it out. First up is build quality, and it's a very, very pleasant surprise. The whole thing is made out of metal and even has a metal mount. It comes in at 1.42 pounds, which is pretty hefty for an f1.8 lens, but it's also a testament to the lens's build quality, as Tokina does use first-class materials. The focus ring is ribbed and grippy and offers up a very firm amount of resistance. It's a little bit challenging to rotate or to turn, but it does feel of high quality, but it also feels like of high quality simultaneously. The exterior of the lens is notably absent of any buttons or switches or aperture rings. Everything about the 85 is controlled from inside of the camera. Now, speaking for myself, this really isn't a downside to me, as I like to control things from inside of the camera most of the time, or the majority of the time anyway. On the inside, it's a relatively simple formula of 10 elements arranged in 7 groups. And included in that formula are one SD low dispersion element, and Tokina has added something called a super low reflection multi-coating, which reduces ghosting and flare for increased contrast and color fidelity. It also helps to repel water, oil, and dust from the front element of the lens. Unfortunately, apart from that coating, Tokina doesn't really seem to have any other weather sealing beyond just that coating, which at $400 or at this price point, honestly, that's not unexpected. It's kind of a compromise, so we sort of expected that. The aperture ranges from f1.8 to f16, and speaking of the aperture, there are 9 rounded aperture blades, which again is another one of those surprises at this price point. Usually, at this price level, we expect the aperture ring to be a compromise. Usually we get like 7 rings to save money, but Tokina has clearly not done that here. They've given us a higher quality feature by including more aperture blades for better background blur or better bokeh rendering. In fact, Tokina calls the 85 a bokeh monster. Now, I'm not ready to call it that, but the bokeh rendering is nice, and we will cover that in the optical quality section of the review. All in, the 85 is a well-constructed, high-quality build of a lens. Even the lens hood and the lens cap are made out of decent quality materials. Again, the only real downside is the fact that the lens is not weather-sealed, and at this price point, as I mentioned previously, it's really not that unexpected, nor is it a disappointment. So overall, for build, we're going to give the Tokina 85mm f1.8 a 9 out of 10. Next up is autofocus speed and accuracy. Outfitted with a stepper motor, the 85 is reasonably fast, very quiet, and mostly accurate in the autofocus department. Now, it's not perfect, but it does take advantage of Sony's eye detect autofocus both in people and animals with very, very good results and a very high degree of success. Now, that said, I have run into a few situations wide open where I find the lens does occasionally miss focus. But it isn't so often, nor is it that frequent enough that I find it all that concerning. Autofocus is brisk, but it's not nearly as fast as the hypersonic motor from Sigma or the ultrasonic motor from Canon. Though autofocus speed is fast enough, I don't feel like I'm going to miss many of my shots, especially if I'm shooting static subjects. I just want to interrupt this video just for a second. One of the questions that I often get is, how does one lens compare to the other with regard to autofocus performance? What I thought I would do, which I haven't really done in my previous reviews, is show a comparison side by side between the Sony 85mm f1.8 and the Tokina 85mm f1.8 with regard to autofocus performance. I set both cameras, the A7 Mark IV and the A7S Mark III, to the fastest transition sensitivity and to lock onto the subject, so they should both move pretty quickly. And this side by side goes on for like 30 to 40 seconds, and I'd like you to be the judge. Looking at this, it's pretty obvious that the Tokina isn't quite as fast as the Sony, especially with regard to acquisition. Sometimes when coming off the screen, the Tokina will lose it, but the Sony will hold on. But by and large, I feel like the Tokina, again, given its relatively much lower price point, does a great job. And in the grand scheme of things, chances are pretty good when you use the Tokina. You're probably not going to miss a shot. I mean, you might have a slight propensity to miss a shot or two more than you would miss with the Sony. But all in, I think the Tokina's performance is definitely admirable, if not quite up to snuff with the Sony, but it still does a really good job. But anyway, go ahead and take a look at this side-by-side comparison. I'll let you be the judge, and comment down below and tell me what you think. Overall, it's a mostly accurate, very fast, and very quiet autofocus performance. I do wish it were a little bit faster and a little bit better, but my results are more than satisfactory most of the time. Meaning for autofocus speed and accuracy, we're going to give the Tokina 85mm f1.8 an 8.5 out of 10. Next up is optical quality and the quality of the results. I've been shooting portraits for almost 2 decades now, and 85mm is probably my overall focal length, my favorite focal length to shoot them with. Subjects should render without a lot of distortion, and I find that 85 is a great focal length to put a comfortable distance between you and your subject while still being able to communicate very effectively with them. Next to the 70-200, I've probably owned more 85mm lenses than just about any other focal length. There was a time when I was obsessed with f1.4 and faster glass. I just felt like with those really wide apertures, I could really blur the background. But over time, I realized that I ended up shooting more portraits at f1.8 and f2 because I wanted to get more of the face instead of just an eyelash in focus. Now, there's an artistic place for that kind of shallow depth of field, and it's nice to have it when you need it. But the reality is, the majority of the time, we want to get the whole face in sharp focus, especially for a professional portrait. And shooting wide open, more often than not, won't allow you to accomplish that. Even as wide as f4, you can still get a pretty decently blurred background, and the separation between your subject and the background will still work really nicely. Now that said, let's talk about the optics. I've been shooting the Tokina for about 2 weeks now, and I've taken about 6 or 7 professional portraits with it, and I've also photographed my kids and my dog and a horse. And I have to say, overall, even wide open, I find the Tokina very impressive. Even more impressive that it's priced at $399 on sale, regularly priced at $499. Historically speaking, Tokina hasn't been all that great with chromatic aberrations in the high contrast areas, but they've always managed to have decently sharp optics, especially where it counts in the frame center. Now, before we get into the still picture and video clip montage, let's go into Lightroom and let's take a look at 2 or 3 images to give you an idea as to what this lens is capable of producing. Before we get into the video montage, what I wanted to do next is show you a couple of important aspects of the lens. And I want to just use a few examples here to show you some important features, notably distortion, bokeh, chromatic aberration, and flare performance, in addition to maybe some sharpness. So real quick, let me just show you, this is straight out of camera, more or less. There might be some minor adjustments here, but straight out of camera, this is one of the examples that I used in the first look video that I produced or put out yesterday. And if you zoom in 100% on this, this is shot at f1.8. That's pretty critically sharp. It looks pretty amazing to me. It's spot on. I captured the eye. It's pretty perfect. I'm sure most women out there would freak out if you zoomed in like this, but bottom line is that whatever percent this is, it's very high. You can tell this is a very good performance and very sharp. Next, I want to show you distortion and vignetting. Shot at f1.8 here. When I put in the lens profile correction in Lightroom, a couple things happen. I want you to notice the edges, and I also want you to notice how the image kind of pops out a little bit. So when we click on it, you can see that the vignetting goes away and the image gets pushed out just a little bit. But here again, when we zoom in on this, you can see this is really pretty amazing. And the subject in this instance was moving towards me. So this is an example of autofocus, continuous autofocus performance, eye detect AF performance, in addition to sharpness. I think overall that looks pretty darn good. I want to show you a couple of bokeh examples. Bokeh, bokeh, I guess it depends on who you're talking to. So I focused obviously on the flower here in the foreground, and you can see that the out of focus background is completely melted away to nothingness, which I think is great. It gives us tremendous subject isolation between the foreground and the background. Again, I can click on the lens profile correction. You're going to notice some vignetting and a little bit of distortion correction, but nothing major. One more bokeh example, just to kind of show you what kind of bokeh balls you get in the background. Not a lot of onion rings. It's a 9-bladed aperture or 9-rounded blade aperture. Most of these are pretty good circles. You get a little bit of cat's eye towards the corners. That's to be expected. This is also shot wide open at 1.8, and you can see it's reasonably sharp. The flag was moving, if it's any consolation, but the background blur to me just looks fantastic. It's kind of so bubbly. I kind of like it. Historically, one area where Tokina has fallen down is in the area of chromatic aberrations. If you go through the history of Tokina lenses, go to a website like Optical Limits and check out Tokina lenses. Almost universally across the board, they all have incredibly high, like 2, 3, 4 pixel wide chromatic aberration in the high contrast areas between lights and darks. For the rookies out there, chromatic aberration happens when, during this transition between light to dark, you go from light to dark immediately like this. During that transition, a lot of lenses have like this weird color fringe that kind of falls right in the path of the transition. And the old Tokinas had vicious purple fringing. It was crazy. These new ones, I'm not seeing any purple fringing at all. I mean, nothing, which is a testament to Tokina finally fixing what has long been the Achilles heel of their lenses. They've always had decent optical performance, but the chromatic aberrations were just a deal breaker for some people. To me, not a really big deal, because even if it had them, one of the beauties of Lightroom is you have this ability to find and pick out the chromatic aberration, and it removes it from the photo with just one click. Really easy stuff to do. So anyway, in this case, it's irrelevant because the Tokina ATX 85mm f1.8 isn't showing any chromatic aberration at all. And last, I want to show you a little bit of flare. This is hard for me to even get. I tried putting my light up in the corners, and the only flare that I could get is when I put it close to the center of the frame. I got this little bubble here on the bottom. That's about the only flare that I got. Outdoors, I hardly saw any. It's just a pretty impressive performance all the way around. So there you go. A couple of aspects I wanted you to see. Now, let's get into the quality of the results that you can get with the Tokina 85mm f1.8 ATXM. It's a very, very good optical performance. Check it out. Last up is value. Historically speaking, we look at low-priced lenses and we generally understand we're going to have some compromises coming in. Usually, the build quality won't be all that great. Maybe it'll be made out of plastic. We're going to usually sacrifice weather sealing, and usually there may only be 7 aperture blades, sometimes even 5 aperture blades, as a way for the manufacturer to save money and to keep the cost of the lens down. Now, I'm very glad to say that Tokina has not skimped in the build quality, as the lens is made out of metal and very high quality materials. It's actually a physical specimen, again, especially at this price point. Lenses built like this are typically much more expensive. The fact that we have 9 rounded aperture blades to render the background as blurry and as beautiful as the Tokina does, that's a great bonus. When you add it all up and then you realize that this lens is only $499 and offers this kind of optical quality and build quality, it's really kind of a no-brainer. And right now, the lens is on sale for only $399, which is really amazing, again, for something of this optical and build quality. I keep reiterating that point because this thing is exceptional and it's true. The only real knock on the lens is the fact that it isn't weather sealed. But again, I keep saying this too, at this price point, that's far from unexpected. So overall, for value, Tokina hits it way out of the park, and the 85 easily earns a 10 out of 10 for value. To wrap up this review, we gave the Tokina 85mm f1.8 a 45.5 out of 50 and our highly recommended rating. The final word: if you're a portrait photographer and you shoot Sony and you're in the market for an 85mm lens, before you jump on the Sony bandwagon of the 85mm f1.4 G Master or the Sony 85 f1.8 or even the Sigma 85 f1.4 Art, you may want to consider the Tokina 85mm f1.8, a lens with extraordinary build quality, 9 rounded aperture blades for beautiful background blur, and optical quality that's very, very good, almost indiscernible from the other lenses that I just mentioned previously. The only real downsides are autofocus that isn't 100% accurate and the fact that the lens isn't weather sealed. But at this price point, those are very small sacrifices to make. And it's not like the autofocus is bad, it's just that it isn't perfect. I mean, for the record, I'm talking about near misses. Most of the time, it just nails it. When it misses, it's not wildly off base. Now, Tokina is often viewed as the forgotten third-party lens manufacturer in the world of cameradom, but generally speaking, they produce lenses of high build quality and very, very good optical quality, especially at their price points. The Tokina 85mm f1.8 for Sony falls right within that Tokina tradition. I'm Darren Miles with Darren Miles Photography, and I'm based here in beautiful, sunny Southwest Florida. If you like videos like this, go ahead and give me a like, or better yet, subscribe. Thank you so much for watching, and until the next time, happy shooting. And we're done.